So mic's live. Cool. Okay. Morning. Congratulations for finding the Elliott room. I have to get into the light so the camera works and my retinas don't. My name's Troy Kirkland, and with me I've got Johan Vosloo, and we're going to present a session on tuning SCOM. So one more slide. So we basically we both work for a team called Premier Field Engineering, and what the team does is it is the team that does the final line of escalation if something goes horribly wrong, but also the team that does the proactive training, so events like this, and we run workshops. And what we specialise in is fixing the stuff that the product doesn't quite do. So for the next 60 minutes we'll be going through some slides, and the guidance we give you in the slides comes from our work, basically working with customers over the last 3 years in tuning SCOM. So some of the guidance you'll see will be quite granular. Some of it may vary slightly from what you see on the product group sites. There is a little bit of disparity between what we recommend here versus in particular what the SQL product group may recommend. So where you see any scripts, numbers, guidance, it's a combination of experience and just guesswork in some cases that seem to have been quite lucky. So Johan's almost lost his voice, so I'll do the first session and then I'll throw it over to him for the second part unless he falls over dead, in which case we'll continue on as this goes. So the agenda is fairly clean. So I'll do the first two sessions. We'll go through some of the misconceptions for monitoring. We'll give you a couple of examples of what we've seen reasonably recently. And then some of the SQL config, in particular reference to Operations Manager. Now there'll be lots of SQL queries, so we'll show you on the slide deck. The slide deck's available as part of the takeaway, or we can email it to you. It's quite large, but so when the media is made available, it'll be in there. A lot of the scripts are available on some of the blog websites anyway, and I'll show you one of them. It's quite popular on that. And then Johan will go through some of the alert management tuning, and then everything else that we couldn't fit into anything that made sense. So some of the popular misconceptions we see, and these are fairly prevalent. So about half of our work is to assist in the deployment of SCOM, and about half of our work is to assist in the removal of or tuning of SCOM. It's not uncommon to have, we had one support case, which I'm trying not to swear as much, so I won't give you all the verbatim, which is basically, please come on and remove your adjectives server from my environment because it's making me going adjectives mad. So it's not uncommon for us to come in and have to tune a box, or in radical cases remove a box. And the guidance that we'll go through will actually, we'll highlight some of the processes we highly recommend to avoid that adjective box scenario. So one of the common misconceptions is it comes tuned out of the box. SCOM, when you run setup, is fairly far from tuned. As you add management packs to the environment, it becomes quite heavily detuned, especially when you see some of the behaviours around importing a management pack. So Johan will go through some guidance on that, but this is one area where it tends to go horribly wrong quite quickly. When you get someone who's basically wrong desk, wrong time, someone walks up with some media and says, go install SCOM, you'll be fine, and we'll drag and drop management packs, for instance. One of my favourites is SQL Server. It's not uncommon. We'll go to site and someone says, I'm monitoring SQL, and they have SQL Server 2005. And they've imported the management packs for 2000, 2005, 2008, 2008 R2. So when we look at our common scenarios, over-import of management packs is fairly prevalent in there. It's not uncommon that people actually look at a monitoring system and say, well, it's a monitoring system, it must self-tune. And that's fairly far from the case. We had a person in the audience, this is a repeat session yesterday, who became the SCOM guy. He should have gone to coffee earlier, but unfortunately he was at his desk. And his boss basically said, you don't need to worry about planning or tuning it, but it's not Unicenter. It is a fairly large beast, and it does require quite a bit of tuning. And we'll go through a lot of SQL focus for the tuning because that is where the impact is going to be basically felt from that. And if I plan my system properly with recommended hardware, I won't have any issues on that. And that can be the case. We'll go through and show you how the database fills. And if you follow some of the guidance around reducing that fill, you can have quite a long product life without having to add hardware. Where we see most of the cases for increasing hardware or changing the architecture of the platform, it's where we basically got this database is exploding because people aren't tuning or removing content. All right. So for the next 10 slides, I'm going to go through some scenarios, and there'll be SQL queries and scripts on screen as well. But the first slide is basically to show you a few common triggers where we can figure out why is SCOM tuned or not. And so we have 5 common issues that you'll see. We see at least 3 or 4 of them in most detuned sites. So the first one is slow console response. Running the console itself is a planning consideration. It's a fairly large application, and if you're running it in the wrong place, it can cause quite a load on the server. Where you see that exacerbated is where there's lots of people running the console, and where it's really bad is where you see someone with my personality just leaning on the F5 button on the console. So planning where the consoles run is key, but one of the issues you may see which is indicative of a detuned SCOM environment is slow console response. The second one is where we have stale health state, not very readable here, where it's taking a long time to update the database. So not so common as an indicator, but fairly indicative of a detuned database. Much more common. Where we have slow configuration distribution, and you throw in these events, 12 10s, is where you're seeing some back pressure in the database, and it's not actually doing, well, it's doing its job, it's just not doing it as quickly as you'd like to see. This can also be really indicative of having too many management packs, or your discovery settings are not where they should be as well. It takes forever to generate a report, and one of the better ones where we see queuing on the management server and the agents. So event 2115 and 8000 has been thrown. So these are fairly or reasonably common indicators of detuned SCOM. But basically, it's the number one indicator that something's wrong is you're getting too many alerts. So it is almost compulsory for someone to yell at us about the noise in SCOM. So we're basically trying to turn that down. Okay. So we'll go through and have a look at queries to look at what's in. to do. So there are a couple of ways to do that. It's quite common to approach them and do both things at the same time. One is you'll actually say, this is what we're going to monitor, opt in, opt out. And the other way is to basically have a dummy subscription channel and assume you won't get the guidance. So it's not uncommon that we're going to have to tune out management packs post-deployment. So just looking at ways to not target real people for those alerts. Right. Cool. So the actual performance signature retention is a cycle. So it's not actually in days. So if you were to take that signature to 2 days, that's actually 14 days of retention. 1 by 7, 2 by 7. So it is a lot of data to be retained. Cool. For performance reasons, we highly recommend 64-bit operating system, 64-bit SQL. It's not that difficult to find virtualization or hardware performance that will allow you to do that, and what that's going to do is open up a lot more memory, and memory is good for SQL. If you read some of the SQL guidance, a highly performant SQL environment would never go to the disk, so you basically run the entire application in memory. Nanoseconds versus milliseconds, it's a fairly significant performance increase. If you can't find 64-bit environment for SQL, then configure their extensions and try and get as much memory as you can into the application there. A couple of things to watch when you are tuning the max memory for SQL. The first one is it's really good to test it. Once again, flippant, but you want to look at your executing memory footprint for SQL and then basically set your max to about that. The reason we say that is that out of the box, it will take a max memory of 2 terabytes. So that means that when SQL starts up on a Windows server, it will assume that unless you have more than 2 terabytes of memory in the box, in which case I need to work for you, then it's going to basically take everything. And then the OS is going to have to request it back. Now, the problem with that is that the OS and SQL aren't the best of friends. And although it is reasonably tuned now in releasing memory, there is a little bit of latency. So it's not uncommon for us to find a SQL server that has 200 to 300 megabytes of free memory, which for Windows is not quite enough for it to avoid the paging process. As soon as you hit the paging process, you get context switching in the CPU, disk I/O, bad stuff escalates quite quickly. So understanding how much memory you need for SQL, testing in a pre-prod environment is fairly beneficial in the long term. Fast network connectivity between the root management servers and the database, fairly easy to do now, but where you have management servers across the WAN, it can be quite latent in injecting into the reporting. So make sure that you can get fast network connectivity wherever possible, so LAN-based or better. Disk alignment and cluster size. If you were at the session yesterday, I cocked this one up. I misheard. So we recommend the 64 kilobyte cluster size. If you are using Windows Server 2008, it should do it by default, but always check. Now, if you do have certain SAN vendors, this recommendation is subject to their personal guidance around how you align the disk as well. So make sure you use check with your SAN vendor and then use Windows Server 2008 to create the partition. It should do the alignment and cluster size correctly. If you're on Server 2003, use diskpart to do it, and then you can actually pick the values during that. For isolation, separate the database, transaction logs, and tempdb. Don't put the tempdb on the C drive. Try and get that somewhere where you're going to have enough disk. If you're not sure, and this is really quite common, what your databases are doing. So when we release these products, we basically say you're going to need a SQL database, but we never tell you until too late what the load's going to be. So there's a sysinternals tool called Procmon. You can download. You can even run it live if you want. Put it on your SQL server. Turn off all the filters except for the file system. Then filter the file system to where your logs, database, and tempdb reside. And then just let it run with some load on it. And what it'll do is it'll show you the reads and writes, allows and failures to those databases. You can then have a pretty good idea, okay, I'm hitting tempdb 100-fold more than any other database. Maybe that should get the performant hard disk. RAID slides coming up? Can't remember. We'll talk about RAID soon. Sorry, we've switched over from yesterday. A simple tool like Procmon will actually show you where your load's hitting. And if it's during a normal workload, it's fairly much a single view of the truth that these databases need more drives or put into a different RAID set. And the RAID set is fairly crucial for that. When we look at our databases, they're going to be random reads and random writes. So it's going to pull from the sector where that bit of data is and put it back. The transactional logs, sequential. So we're looking at different database and disk patterns for that. As I alluded to earlier, split the tempDB into multiple files within the file group, one per CPU. We don't count the hyperthread, but I would highly recommend that you look at going from 1 to somewhere in the vicinity of 8, depending on your CPUs. Past 8, the payback's fairly negotiable. Never go past 16. Now, the problem with adding more files to the tempDB file group is that you're going to move the bottleneck from CPU to disk. So plan this quite carefully. If you think that you've got a CPU bottleneck now in tempDB and your tempDB is on C drive and you think you're going to add more files to the C drive, then you're going to have a fairly nasty disk issue. It's not uncommon now that we will place tempDB onto some of the more performant disk. It only needs to be quite small. 15 gigabytes, I think is the largest we've seen on that. So it's not a large volume, but it is nice to be performant. Cool. No, it's on the next one. Cool. All right. So if you look at the guidance, you'll see that there's a lot of write-ups, or a few write-ups around the operations manager process being write intensive. In the documentation, up to 80% of the interactions are writes. So what we've done here in the lab, and it's quite hard to read, is we've actually, or Johan has, because it's PowerShell, and I'm still an old man, is run a few commandlets and pipe them into other commandlets and come up with some output on some load. And what we're seeing here is that 68% of the total IOPS is write. So somewhere in that ballpark, 70 to 80% of your I/O will be write. And what that means is that then drives your disk decisions. So if you're going to look at what your RAID set's going to be in there, and you have a company mandate that says it's going to be RAID 5, for a write-intensive operation, that's going to be fairly nasty. So if you have RAID 5, you're going to have a fairly large write penalty versus RAID 1+0 in there. So when you're looking at what you're going to do in the disks, it's important to know that you are going to be write intensive. That then goes through to your tuning for caching as well. So a recommendation out of the box, your mileage may vary, 25% read, 75% write, and always use battery-backed cache if you can. You don't want to have a lost write or a non-committed write in the database. That gets quite interesting quite quickly. Cool. And for those who want to read even more non-English, have a fairly intensive disk plan formula. So depending on the speed of your drives, the number of IOs that we normally get off a drive, is going to give you the number of disks you need for those IOPS. Because we're basically looking at your RAID penalty here as well. So for instance, if you have mirroring, then we're going to halve the number of spindles that can actually spin at a time from there. So it's in the slides if you want to go through and have a look at that. We're now looking at a rule of thumb, 1,000 IOPS plus the number of agents for that calculation. Now what's happening is that as we see a fairly hard stop in the number of revolutions you can get on a drive, and a green initiative which says that the faster you spin a drive, there's an exponential increase in the amount of power to spin it. We're starting to see smaller drives as well, slower drives as well. So we can't really spin them much faster than that. The formula should give you some idea on the drives you need for that. Performance counters. So when we're looking at counters to actually monitor itself, so you can actually create SCOM rules to monitor SCOM, or you can use an offline tool from Coplex. There's a tool called PAL, P-A-L, where you can dump out an event log, a performance log, and have a look at it. So what we're doing here is there's a couple of counters that we're going to be interested in more than others. First one is average seconds per read and seconds per write on the logical drive. If you're above 15 milliseconds, you tend to be into a slightly interesting disk issue. As it goes past 25 milliseconds, it gets even more interesting. And so what that would look like in SCOM, as you'll see that we have in our lab environment some fairly regular peaks above 15 milliseconds. So we're starting to look at adding the number of spindles or changing our RAID pattern or changing our storage to get that down. You don't want to be above that line for too long. Peaks you can handle, but you don't want to be up there. If we look at the bottom graph here, average disk queue length should always be less than 2 per physical disk. Once again, if we have a RAID set, we don't count the passive part of that mirror. So you want to keep that below 2. Now, the caveat for this is if you're connected to a SAN, that disk queue length can be a nonsense number anyway. So it's quite hard as a generic rule of thumb to say 2, but it's about the only one we do have for that. So disk queue length is the second counter there. The third one is the buffer cache hit ratio. And what this is saying is that for the SQL process to fulfill the request, do I actually have to come out of the cache? And you basically want to keep it as close to 100% as possible. If it's less than 98%, it's going to the disk system. Sorry, going to the disk to get the data it needs. You don't want to do that if you can avoid it. Nanoseconds from memory, milliseconds from disk. And if disk is under contention, then that becomes quite a common performance issue. The SQL guys would like to have you run the database in memory hot, and it does make it much more performant, but you need to have enough memory to do that. So coming from the buffer, we're not really pushing this box, so 100% is fairly easy to achieve for that. As you'll see, most of the stuff we're showing you is being monitored itself in SCOM. So it's not that difficult to have performance views that will actually show you in a console how the box and how the platform's going. All right. A few more performance counters. These ones we're actually pulling from Ops Manager itself. So the write action module is average batch size, processing time. You want to have a look at a few thresholds here. If it's above 5,000, you've got a data burst occurring. I think we have a screenshot on that. No, average batch size. So a few more counters there. Yeah, there's average batch size. We weren't even pushing it. To have running, to see what's going on in the box. Cool. And with that, I'll, with lack of grace, hand over to Johan.
Thanks. Okay, now for the serious part of this presentation. Alert management and tuning. Just to finish off on what Troy said about the database, nothing affects performance in Operations Manager more so than the database. Just having a working database is, it doesn't mean that you have a healthy database. So fairly important to pay attention to those guidance that Troy has provided on that. And it's also good to come back over time and just make sure that is still in place, because you never know what the DBA guy is up to, or the SAN guy. And apologies to any of you guys out there that might be that guy. So a good idea to check that and recheck it. On to alert management and tuning. So why should we tune Operations Manager? Well, it helps to keep that database footprint small, and in larger environments it can be quite tricky to keep it under 50 gigabyte. This is specifically the operations database, especially if you have to maintain 50% free space. It does help to reduce the workload for all the components involved, your network, the servers that are involved, and not least of which is your operations team. Now, operators are typically more motivated when they know that what they see in the console is actually important. It could help you to save on hardware tuning instead of having to upgrade your disk capacity or CPU or memory, maybe even virtualize some of those components. Help to meet service levels, and lastly, keep those dashboards green. Just a few general alert management considerations. Close old alerts with high repeat counts. As long as they're active, they will never be groomed. Take care with the custom alert resolution states. So a custom resolution state could be something like assigned to Bob or tier 2. Now, Operations Manager will auto-resolve alerts that are in the new resolution state for you by default in 30 days' time. But if you've changed this resolution state to something else, then this rule is not going to kick in, and it may never get closed if you don't do it manually. Never close monitor-generated alerts manually. Monitors have the ability to auto-resolve, unlike rules. And also, a new alert will not be raised as long as the objects remain in that degraded state. Too many alerts will slow down alert views and reduce the retention of closed alerts because they take up quite a bit of space in your database. It's important to formulate some sort of strategy to alert management and tuning. And this slide is part one of a very, very basic two-part strategy. So this deals with the alert management part of it. So just stepping into that, not every alert can receive the same amount of attention from us. And Operations Manager provides us with two classifications for alerts, severities and priorities. Now, severity could be something like critical warning or information, and priority is high, medium, or low. So you can define service levels based on that classification and then provide it the necessary attention. So the second step is typically that the alert resolution is changed. Again, something like assigned to Tier 2. Tier 2 may receive some sort of notification, launch an investigation, and resolve the root cause. They may even record the resolution steps in the company knowledge section of the alert source, which makes life just a little bit easier for the next person that's faced with this issue. And then finally, and this is a step that's quite often missed, they'll make some sort of decision as to whether this alert source requires tuning. And this decision comes down to a few factors, typically. How useful the alert was, the frequency of the alert, perhaps even something like how accurate the classification was. Is it truly critical? Is it truly high priority to fix this? Just because we think that something is critical and high doesn't mean that it is necessarily critical and high for your environment. So this is part two, and we recommend that you identify in each one of these four areas the top candidates for tuning on a regular basis. These are not the only areas that you can consider. Others might include something like discoveries or property changes. But these four would be a great start. And as you can see, alerts come at the highest cost per instance in terms of disk space, followed by events. But actually, performance insertions followed by events are the largest consumers of space in our database. And this is just because there are so many more instances of those. So we can see that from this pie chart. And this pie chart was manually created from the table size query that you saw in Troy's part of this. So performance and event take up probably about 3/4 of our database size there. So definitely the best targets. This is a query that you can use to find the most frequent alerts by repeat count. Now, repeat count is something that you get with alert suppression. So instead of seeing a separate line item in your console, so a separate alert, you'll just see an increment to the repeat count column. And that's an example of the output that you might get from that. And the recommendation is that you target the top 5 culprits there, and just focus your troubleshooting efforts on those. And pretty soon your database will be quite tuned, and a lot of noise will no longer be there. In the green section there is a SQL script that you can use, and this will actually identify the objects that are associated with each one of these alert strings. Excuse me. Some water. So that's an example of the output of that. So as you can see, my TMG server is the top culprit there with 229 instances of that alert. Yep. Not every alert has alert suppression enabled. It's not always possible. So you can use this query to identify the most frequent alerts by alert count. A similar sort of output there. This is possibly even more important from my perspective, because each one of these represents a different line item and can keep our operators quite busy. Most frequent events. Now, this is the second biggest consumer of space in our database. Note that this talks about events that are collected, and these collected events are not related to the alerts that you get in your console from the occurrence of a specific event. So it's a good idea to have a look and see if these events are actually useful to you. If they're not useful to you, then they're just taking up space. And as you can see in this case, hopefully you can see, my top two events take up 280,000, well, that's 280,000 instances. And if I multiply that by 0.8 kilobyte, okay, it's only 224 megabyte-ish, but that's a quarter of a gigabyte, and I think 1/100th of your database allowance taken up by just two event IDs. So probably a good idea to get rid of these. Also happens to be something that operations manager, is guilty of. those two events belonging to operations manager. Now the biggest target, performance insertions. This query will return all of the most frequent performance insertions for you. Quite useful for finding duplicate counters in your, or duplicate collections of performance counters. For instance, the Exchange and Windows-based operating system management packs both collect logical disk counters. If you read the Exchange management pack deployment guide cover to cover, it will tell you to turn off either one, but this is not always done. And also operations manager admins may go and create custom performance collections, not knowing that something is already being collected. And of course, we might be collecting something by default that you just don't care about. So good idea to review the list. Most frequent state changes. And this is when an object changes from one state to another, such as healthy to critical or warning or unmonitored or offline potentially. And that's an example of the output there. Now monitors have the ability to auto-resolve, which means that these that any alerts related to this state changes may happen unnoticed in your console. So if you don't run this query, you might never identify these monitors with thresholds that could be potentially right on the baseline. Something else that results in frequent state changes is agent restarts. And agents restart typically because system resource limits that we've set are being reached. So it's a good idea to create an alert generating rule that will look out for the event that is associated with that. So that concludes the alert management and tuning section. I think a good alert management and tuning regime will definitely increase the value you get from your monitoring investment. On to just a few miscellaneous items. Agents should never report to the root management server primarily in large environments. In smaller environments, this is acceptable. In larger environments, they should report to a management server and maybe use the RMS as a backup. Don't run other applications on the RMS. It's quite a busy little box. Don't run the console on the RMS. If you are connecting over a slow WAN, don't run the console locally to where you are. RDP in somewhere and use the console locally if possible. Large views affect performance quite heavily, as do diagram views. And you can use user roles that restrict these views, and also the console scoping feature. This becomes even more obvious if you consider that that every console polls the database every 15 seconds by default. So if you have 50 operators sitting out there, all scoped to all data, and each one of those consoles are polling the database every 15 seconds, then that's quite a big performance hit on your database. We've got a way to control this, and it's basically a registry key. So in large environments with a lot of consoles, this is a good idea. Potentially, may result in more problems if your operators are going to sit there and press F5 every 5 seconds, like I'm sure Troy would, due to his personality. The root management server controls group calculation. Now, custom groups can be created to serve as targets for overrides and also in defining user roles. The RMS recalculates and sets the relationships in the database every 30 seconds by default. So in large environments with 300 plus custom groups, this can affect performance. This can also affect performance even if the environment is smaller, but your group membership criteria is more complex. So it might be appropriate in your environment to set this out, possibly even to several hours. Of course, it comes with group update membership latency, which you must understand. Always update to the latest Operations Manager management pack. The Operations Manager team sets the standard for management packs. And this management pack will keep your Operations Manager healthy, will help to keep it healthy. Apply the latest cumulative updates. It's important to read the installation instructions quite carefully. Check your file versions before and after you've applied the update. And always check that your agent management folder on your management servers and root management server has actually received the kb.exe. If you don't, and if it's not there, then your agent base may not receive the update as well. And also your standalone consoles typically require the update. Check the antivirus exclusions for Operations Manager. There's an article that you can use. I find customers are pretty good at doing this on the management servers and maybe even on the SQL side, but they don't always roll it out to the agents. Just as important on the agent side. It's a few links that we consider to be important. Do you want to say anything specific on this, like yesterday?
So the fourth article down is the sorry, I think it's about to fall over. Is the TempDB white paper. Now, if you are using any of applications which use SQL, an understanding of that white paper is fairly essential. Poor placement and disk design for TempDB will cause no end of performance issues on that. There's the disk alignment, disk position alignment best practice for SQL Server, which is also quite useful for that. I think those are fine. So there's a couple of others which we haven't put in there, and I'll show you those. So when we're looking at a couple of articles from Kevin Holman's blog, which is fairly useful, we're not meant to reference blogs as part of the support of Microsoft. If it's not in TechNet or in our Premier portal, then it's typically not meant to be discussed. Now, there are two people that have a loose exclusion from that. Kevin's one of them, and there's a guy who does content deployment has the other one. So don't be afraid to read Kevin's guidance as if it was company guidance. So what we've got here is that, as Johan talked about, it's not uncommon to have a monitor change status frequently. And one of the key... Oh, you can't see it. Minor detail. There we go. No wonder you're looking at me like I'm even dumber. So one of the key examples of the monitor state flipping is the DNS management pack. It assumed that you would have some fairly quick local resolution, sub-second. And so it would change state, especially if you include the AD and DNS management packs, and they kind of fight to the death on that. So in his site here, he's basically said how to look at it. The threshold in the management pack is 1 second, which is there, and as you can see, we're breaching it on a fairly regular basis and then coming back under on a fairly regular basis. So this will generate flips in the monitor state. So we're basically, with his guidance in this particular case, we're looking at, say, maybe a threshold of 3 seconds for a group of servers, in this case, Windows Server 2003 box, running on something from Motat, is where you want to tune that. Another example is how to identify what's happening in config churn. This is a fairly common scenario. He's got a couple of links to other articles which are, you need a doctorate in understanding some of them, which he translates fairly well. Where you see this event firing a lot. Ops Manager has received new configuration management for your group from the config service. If you see a lot of these, and it's not uncommon, what you're looking at is tuning possibly your discovery. Are you over-discovering the environment and therefore refreshing the configuration on too frequently? About the only ones to add to that. So Kevin Holman's blog is a fairly useful tool on there. He does respond to requests. He actually responds to public requests faster than he does to my email, so it's probably better just post a question there and he'll respond to that pretty quickly. And I think we have one more slide in your Cactus. Cool. Yeah. Okay. So a few more links on that. The explicit issue around the localized text table is highlighted there. So,
yeah, might just say something about the stale state change data. So stale state change data comes about when we disable a monitor, while some of the objects that monitor applies to are still in a degraded state. So any state change data that's associated with those objects will never be groomed. So you have to do this manually.
Okay. So we've got a few more minutes for some questions. First one, did anyone respond to my request yesterday? Has anyone got the answer? Okay, cool. So if you want the question, there'll be another question tomorrow in my SharePoint session with the answer in the final one. So if you're a sucker for punishment, there might be an interesting response to that. Okay. So any questions? How about the rugby?
Oh.
He almost got through it. I actually put a picture of Richie McCaw in the slide deck, but he looked a bit nervous, so I thought it was a bit mean.
So last year, Troy didn't follow rugby at all, apparently. He didn't watch any of the games last year.
I didn't watch any of the All Blacks
This year
games.
he's a big fan.
So here's a question. Oh. So it's on the host bus adapter?
Yeah, that's a good one, yeah.
Yeah. So from a Microsoft point of view, we recommend and have guidance up to the firmware on the adapter. And so anything past that, so which adapter should be using, what firmware should it be running, is highly, and it has had an emotional output for us, is your SAN vendor's realm. So yes, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for your attendance. Nice work finding the Elliott room, by the way. Thank you.
Thanks.